Hello. This video is being made in response to questions proposed by Jack Kilroy, my father. Now, a bit of a disclaimer. A few disclaimers, really. One, I have tried to make these videos before to explain what I'm about to explain. And my abilities in both writing and communication, vocabulary, tend to break down while trying to explain this model. There are things in this model that we don't have terminology for, at least not that I'm aware of. I've uploaded videos, I've tried writing books, this is a tough one for me to explain. And further disclaimer, I'm doing it in answer to my father. I love you, Dad, but at 46, I still have a hard time explaining things as if it were just me explaining things. Adding you to the equation changes things for me. So this is not going to be, my videos aren't polished, but this isn't going to be as pretty as they usually are even. Your questions revolve around free will and human consciousness. To the best of my ability, let me explain human consciousness. I don't know where it begins. Is it some point in the womb? If it is in the womb, at what point? If it is in the womb, in what way does the actual experience of birth affect our consciousness? What do the immediate responses we're exposed to upon birth, how do they affect consciousness? If you're born in a posh, well-to-do hospital, is your consciousness affected differently than if you're born in an alley or on a grass plain? I don't know where it begins. I think it begins in the womb. Where in the womb, I do not know. In simplest terms, there are three primary factors that affect our consciousness. Environmental, posh hospital, alley. Those are environmental things that shape our consciousness. Chemical. Our bodies are a mass of chemicals. When reinforcing our consciousness, we have to take into consideration things like, for me personally, I wasted a lot of my life while contemplating as what we now call a gamer. Chemically speaking, the effects of being a gamer, we now know, are this constant bombardment of serotonin, this pleasure response, this reward response. That is true no matter what lifestyle you lead. And the third factor is the container, the shape, the actual construct of consciousness. Now, one of your points was the difference between sovereignty and servant when it comes to free will. Let's start at the basics, the beginning. Let's say we have a blank slate. We have certain innate drives in us. We have to because we exist as entities. We can't sit idle. We must do something. We have physical bodies. So to do something is to make a choice. At the barest at the beginning of it all, there is a choice to move or not move. There's a choice to move. Once you compound that, a choice to move in a direction, or a choice to move in no direction, aimless. To aimlessly move is something I'm not familiar with. The memetics of that, the construct of that, I'm not familiar with. I'm familiar with movement in direction. Whether good or bad, it's direction. Let's say you start out with just something simple, curiosity. You move in a direction, and it is that direction is determined by curiosity. You meet something environmental. Your reaction at the most simple level, if it's protective, it's informative. As we interact with our environment, these skills are created and then developed and then reinforced. If I move out with curiosity and meet resistance that's unpleasant, I develop my consciousness. I determine my consciousness in rudimentary ways. At first, it's just, sometimes you don't have a choice. You need fear, you need survival instincts. So if at first you move with curiosity and you meet resistance or you encounter anything, you develop abilities to deal with the things that you encounter. Now, at the base level, this happens in all of nature, at least in all of nature that moves itself. Plants are a bit different. Sometimes they're not, but mostly they're just, anyways. At the basic level of consciousness, there's no determination. There's environmental only. If you are a butterfly and you're born a color that makes it easier for you to survive, your color is passed on. If you're born a color that makes it harder to survive, you get eaten and your color isn't passed down. That's no self-determination. That's strictly our environment affecting us. And we have that. We have that still at the core of our consciousness. Some people never have the opportunity to develop beyond that stage. It's not that they don't have the capacity. They just don't have the opportunity. That would be in extreme cases, not just poverty, but also wealth. Extreme cases of wealth changes the consciousness. It changes the resistance that you meet, the solutions that you find for resistance. Now, what I'm describing is a consciousness that is moving forward, that is moving in a direction. Perspective can tell you whether it's forward or backwards. That meets encounters or resistance or rewards, that then compounds our desire, our will. If we meet resistance or pain, we develop a will that says, I want to avoid that pain. Some of us go towards the pain. As we develop our consciousness, our motivations for moving forward compound from simple curiosity to curiosity and desire, curiosity and survival, curiosity and fear. And we're introduced from this first compound level to further elements of consciousness. If what we reach out to generates curiosity and fear become the primary, if you're in a position where curiosity and fear, or protective nature and fear are your primary driving motivators for your will, we're introduced to things that further compound it, like bravery, selfishness. That is the compounding of our will. Think further into it, things like consequences. If I move first with curiosity, compound with fear and desire, and I take an action, that action has consequences. Those consequences, transversely, I think is the word, affect the composition of what I use to meet new experience. If it was curiosity, fear, and desire, I meet a consequence, that compound changes. It adapts. It gets more complex. Sometimes it gets less complex. Sometimes we adapt to the point where things get too complex, and the conscious will tries to simplify things. It says progress will not be made if we don't simplify things. We can't just react and be crazy about this. We have to simplify things to survive. If I could, I would do this visually, but I don't have any skills in that regard. That is the basics. That is the meat and bones of consciousness. Moving forward is will. Moving in a direction is will determined. Now, I know explaining this is not enough excuses. Heart and mind. I know that you believe the Bible is a literal truth. This is God's instructions for us. But I want you to take a minute and just imagine that you are a conscious will and have decided to create. What we see that was created is an interactive environment, an intelligent creature, human. Given consciousness far beyond that is just slaved or subject to microevolutionary processes. We were given or have the ability to advance beyond that. Imagine you see that creation. Think of how we were thousands of years ago in the time of Egypt. We were, from what we can tell, we were just beginning to expand our consciousness in a way that benefits more people. We were just beginning to think of things that were greater than us. And to give those things labels, to give those things, we project upon, say, the sun, a will, because we recognize a will in us. That thing must be more powerful, it's more than we can understand. We project upon the sun will, consciousness. It is more powerful. It must have determinations for our existence. It must explain things that happened that we, at that time, had no capacity to explain ourselves. That is the start to thinking of something greater than ourselves. Well, we weren't very good at it. I imagine one of the things sorely lacking was a capacity for empathy. The reason I imagine that is, if the Bible is historical evidence of interference or influence from something greater than us, it seems that there's an arrow of progress that is desired by that entity. In Egypt, it takes a section of humans that would be more receptive to new freedoms, to new ability, to the availability of more determination, and frees them and shows them miracles. Why? There has to be a reason behind it. I think that it was to try and create a base of humans to influence, so that in their actions they could influence many others. One of the dominant themes of that interaction, of that intercession, seems to me to be the desire to instill further empathy in at that time, the chosen people. But every time that entity interacts with us, it can only be successful to a certain level where we are able to understand it. I believe that there was probably many times there were probably more times where the interaction happened, and our capacity to understand it just failed. For an example, the Ten Commandments. If I were an entity trying to impose some kind of moral structure, some kind of arrow of progress into the human species, I would create the authority, no other God before me. I would create the basics, thou shalt not kill. Don't steal your neighbor's wife. Don't even want to steal your neighbor's wife. Just the basics. In doing so, it shows me that, one, there was a need for it, and two, that was the direction that was desired. And look at the results of that. The first copy is smashed. Consequences are introduced. He can't go into the promised land. He'll get him there, but he can't enter. He gives him another copy. One of the basic tenets, thou shalt not kill, is violated repeatedly en masse from that point till they reach the promised land. But it's introduced. The results were not perfect, but it was introduced into the consciousness. They must have had plenty of examples as to why killing was just fine. We've seen what the interaction is like when humans have slaves. We've seen the treatment that occurs when we take slaves, force them to do our will, take away their free will, and force them into... We see that. There must have been a need for that basic command, thou shalt not kill. And I can imagine the circumstances that led to it. Okay, I'm getting off subject here. I always tend to do that with you. As far as sovereign and servant, two seemingly opposing states of consciousness. As we move forward and adapt, our consciousness grows. We have free will in that we can examine the results of our interactions with our environment. We can select a desired outcome for future interactions. We can try to impose what we think will bring about that change. If we want to be more, let's take simple things, like if we want to be more outgoing, we will consciously select, in our reflection, we'll select things that we think will lead to that change in our consciousness. I want to be more outgoing. This is something I believe, whether it's something I read in a journal, saw on TV, came up with myself, read in the book. This is something I believe that will change how I interact or how I respond to encounters in life. That is free will. That is our determination. We all have that ability. But due to whether it be environmental, chemical, physical, we all have different capacities to actually enact that will. I'm smart at an average level, I'd say. And it took me forever to understand that certain things I'm doing consciously are having a deleterious effect on my soul, on my consciousness. I knew that they were deleterious. I knew that they were harmful. I knew that changes need to be made, but I didn't enact them very well. And I think that's true of a lot of us. And the other problem we face is once we've compounded our conscious approach to how we interact with our environment, we tend to find ways to reinforce, to continually convince ourselves that these are proper actions, that these are desirable outcomes, that if we don't reach the desirable outcome, it's either our fault or the fault of another. That's our conscious will compounding. That's our conscious will being both slave and sovereign. If you add into the mix, as I know you do, the pressure or force or influence that is the Holy Spirit, that Holy Spirit has a direction, a plan, a desire for you. I imagine that we couldn't fathom what the desired outcome is. Sorry. So it's given to us in ways of direction. If there is a language that God uses to talk to us, it is a memetic language. See, one of the reasons Richard Dawkins went a bit crazy when he discovered the idea of memetics was that he thought it was proof that God doesn't need to exist. It was him seeing something, recognizing something in our consciousness, and thinking that it answered a problem he'd been trying to answer for years anyway. Trying to eliminate the need for a higher power that has influence and desires for our lives. When in fact, it was probably language. The idea of directly interacting with us doesn't seem to work out very well, historically speaking. So what he does now is he tries to influence and shape us through memetics, these gene-like units of culture, units of consciousness that we replicate. And I think we even somewhat recognize that when we experience things repeatedly and we ask ourselves, what is God trying to tell me? That is God speaking memetically to us. I don't know that I necessarily believe specifically in your version of God, but I do believe that there is something trying to influence us. That something understands how our consciousness works. I understand how our consciousness works. I don't have the capacity to explain it well. I think in your Bible you're talking about how more often heart and will is talked about. I think that that's because there is a desired arrow of progress for us. I think that there is a hope that if we were created for a purpose, and there is a hope to get us there, to get us to where we were created to be. If creation is not true, and the outside intelligent influences are something other than the God you believe in and taught me, raised me to believe in, I still believe that we can see through the actions an arrow of progress that is trying to be fulfilled. Sorry, excuse me. One of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing is because whether I can explain it or show it in such a way that people say, hey, this is how it works. It doesn't so much matter that I understand how it works. As long as I see how it works, decide what I desire to influence in other people. I desire what I think will make the world better is an increase in empathy, a movement towards greater empathy, a movement away from the selfish consciousness trying only to fulfill its own desires, a movement towards the selfish consciousness understanding that it meets more and better results by moving together with empathy. That is what I've decided to try and change. Because I see how the consciousness works. I realize that in just seeing how it works, having that understanding of a basic model, whether I've described it or not, effectively, I have tried to. Anyways, I see how it works, and the choice I'm making is to increase empathy, to try and show by example how the consciousness works and show the benefits, increase the desire to move in an empathetic way. Look, this is 30 minutes long. And I realize that most people don't watch these things for more than 6 minutes. So this was a sad attempt to try and explain something I've been trying to explain for a while in answer to a question from my father. If for some reason you've made it 30 minutes into the video and you have something to say, comment. Tell me I'm a fool. Tell me you like what I'm saying. Whatever it is. If you think I'm a fool or you think there's something useful, share it. If you think I'm a fool, you'll get much better results in a humor sense. You may come up with good jokes to put me down, but somebody else can come up with better jokes. So share it. If you think it's useful, share it with someone you think needs to hear it. Like or dislike, this is simple. Participate in some way. Say, hey, I liked it. Hey, that was ridiculous. I waited through 30 minutes of this. Don't like. And again, if something is useful, share it. I don't expect many will get this far in. And I'm sorry for the sad attempt at trying to explain this. We don't have the language. I don't have the capacity to explain this properly. So I've decided to just not explain it. I've chosen what I desire for an outcome from having understood this, and I'm moving in that direction. Sorry for the length. Thank you.